Oh, shoot. Hello there and welcome to this video. My name is Kees and I'm a freelance photographer and I've been using the Fujifilm X-H2S for 1 year exclusively. Here's what I've found.
Hello. I am a Fujifilm X-H2S, serial number 249. Welcome to my self-assessment. For video, I can shoot 4:2 to 10-bit color, allowing for heavy color grading. I am the first Fujifilm camera with the new F-Log2 profile. By downsampling from 14-bit RAW, I can now capture over 14 stops of dynamic range, extracting details from overexposed log footage, complete highlight recovery. To test noise variation of my ProRes codecs, we need to move to a darker environment. Engaging night mode. In this environment, the high dynamic range of F-Log2 is unnecessary. Switching to the regular F-Log profile. With 12 stops of dynamic range, there is still a significant amount of latitude in exposure. Using F-Log unlocks the DaVinci Resolve color managed workflow, allowing easy and mathematically correct post-processing. F-Log also has the fastest rolling shutter performance of any hybrid camera, 1/180th of a second. Now assessing ProRes codecs. 3 ProRes codecs detected: ProRes LT, ProRes 422 and ProRes HQ. ProRes LT is the lightest of the 3 and offers relatively small file sizes. Using heavy color grading to break the image apart. No color banding present. Noise performance acceptable. Use of third-party noise reduction software advised at ISO values of 6400 and above. Switching to ProRes 422. No change in noise performance, color fidelity remains the same. Finally, switching to ProRes HQ, slight improvement in noise performance, color fidelity remains the same. Warning, at a recording rate of 1877 megabit per second, you'll fill up a 512 gigabyte CF Express card in less than 35 minutes. Switching to H.265 all-intra compression for lower data rates. In H.265, I can record 10-bit 422 at just 360 megabit per second. A proxy workflow is required for smooth post-processing. Despite the high compression, there is a noticeable improvement in noise performance, with a lighter and finer noise pattern. Interestingly, contrast is slightly reduced. Color fidelity remains the same. Now testing slow motion in 4K at 120 frames per second, with a bitrate of 720 megabit per second. With a 1.29 times crop, 4K 120 frames per second has significantly less downsampling than my regular 4K recording options, resulting in worse noise performance. Using external noise reduction software to improve results. Noise now stays within acceptable levels. Noise performance may improve when disabling log and shooting in one of the standard Rec 709 color profiles. Switching to the Cinematic Eterna color profile. Noise values have improved with good color straight out of the camera. Because we're still in 10-bit 422 color, color grading is still possible.
And we are back in the studio. Now that was a lot of information to take in, sorry about that. I hope you enjoyed watching that as much as I enjoyed making it. But I think we can all agree that this camera has some amazing potential for video. One thing I didn't put in there, and that's worth mentioning, is that this camera also shoots 6.2K open gate. The fact is, I've never used that feature for my user case. It's not that interesting, but it is something this camera can do, and it's worth mentioning. The biggest takeaway for me was that I only shoot in ProRes LT or H.265. H.265 is a codec that I can use when I want to record to both cards simultaneously, so if I shoot a wedding and I absolutely don't want to lose anything, whereas ProRes LT is great for projects where you can back things up every hour or so. Now let's talk about photos, because this is a hybrid camera, and that means that the photo capacities will also be very good. Now I could rattle off the spec sheets about like how fast it does burst, and yes, it does shoot 40 frames raw a second, but I never really use that. What I think is the most important about photos is just the image quality itself, and let's talk about that. First of all, the thing I noticed when I shot this camera in events where the lighting was questionable, say bad quality lighting, bad quality artificial lighting, or just not enough, so you're gonna have to use higher ISOs, I noticed this camera retains colors very well. It does very well in creating a nice punchy image even in these bad lighting conditions. And that's very nice if you shoot an event, because that means that when you bring your photos into Lightroom, it's very easy to get good quality renders out of them without having to push and pull so much. And it saves me time. Then let's talk about dynamic range real quick. In real life scenarios, I've never found myself in a situation where I said, oh, I wish I had more dynamic range. And that brings me to part 3 of this video, the autofocus. Autofocus is, next to the expanded video capacities, the main selling point of this camera. I'll say it's really good, but you have to know how to set up Fujifilm autofocus correctly, because if you don't, you're gonna have mixed results. I put the settings here on the screen for you to read out. You can do this in the AFC custom menu option. For video, it has basically 2 modes. Standard box mode, where you put the box, it will autofocus, or the multi mode, where you let the camera do all of the autofocusing by itself. You have no direction over it in any way, shape or form. Interestingly, this is the mode I use the most, because I found the camera is very good at picking a subject and sticking with it, again, if you use the right settings. The video montage you saw in the beginning of this review, that was actually shot in multi-mode, where the camera does all of the autofocusing for you. I think we can all agree that it does really smooth focus pulls, and it sticks to subjects really, really well. For photography, you have more options, but I'll say it's pretty much the same when it comes to how sticky the autofocus is and how good it is to use. One thing I really like for photography, and that's unfortunately not there in video, is white tracking, where you basically put a tracking box on any type of subject, and if that subject moves or if you move the camera, it will keep tracking. One part of the autofocus that I use a lot, I use it right now as well, is the face and eye detect. I use it in video. I've shot long takes of moving subjects of 5 minutes long where it never lost focus, but also in studio or when I do portraiture photography for one of my clients. I get a hit rate of nearly 100%, which means that I get more headspace to focus on like composition, which is also very important, and coaching my subjects, because often those are not models, those are regular people, and of course they feel a little bit uncomfortable in front of the camera. One thing I have to mention about the face and eye detect is that when I have it enabled and my subject starts turning away from the camera like this, and the camera loses the face, that's when it can start hunting, and you get a little bit of these weird focusing artifacts, or when you take photos, that's when photos are going to be out of focus. And that's a shame, because otherwise it would be really, really nice to use. It is something that has improved with firmware updates, but it's still there, and I just wish Fujifilm would have like a general person recognition, so that if it loses the face, it would still track that person. Then it's time for part 4 of this review, build quality and ergonomics. The build quality, I have to say, is really good. Still have no issues with any parts. They all feel just like the day I bought it. And the weather sealing also works very well. I brought this camera to the north of Sweden last year. It was a very, very wet holiday. The camera got wet a couple of times and it kept functioning perfectly well. In fact, I would say the lens will often get so wet that it's impossible to shoot anyway, before I would even fear about the weather sealing. Then the ergonomics. These are unfortunately a little bit of a mixed bag. Overall, I love the ergonomics. I love the shutter button. I love the size of the grip. It's really good, but sometimes I feel some of the buttons are a little bit too far apart if you have small hands like I have. Then there's also a few quirky choices that Fujifilm made that it should improve on the next model. One of the things Fujifilm should improve is the ISO button. The old Fujifilm X-H2S simply had an ISO dial which you could turn to the right ISO. Now if I want to change the ISO on the Fujifilm X-H2S, I have to press a separate ISO button, then use my thumb dial or the D-pad keys to change it to the right ISO. And the problem is, when I do that, a submenu opens with all of the ISO settings that I can choose. However, when I scroll through it, I can't see my histogram, which is my most important tool for assessing exposure. So right when I'm setting my exposure, I can't look at my histogram, and I think that's a major oversight. Another thing I don't like is the focus selector button. It used to be a simple switch, so by feel you could already feel what focusing mode you were on, whether it was continuous, single shot or manual autofocus. Now I have to press a button, scroll through the options, then hit OK on the D-pad, and that's just a lot more effort compared to just doing one flick of a switch. There are also a couple of positives, however, that I specifically want to mention. One is the eye cup. It's really nice and robust and it fits well with my eye. So that's nice to use, especially compared with the X-H1 where the eye cup would always come off. Another thing that's really nice is the new drive mode menu. It's super fast to work with once you get used to it. And now I can easily switch from all kinds of different bracketing to burst to single shot in just a couple of seconds. So I'm loving that. Battery life is vastly improved on this camera compared to the X-H1. The X-H1 would always go through batteries faster than a cowboy goes through bullets. And that was annoying. When I shot weddings with the X-H1, I usually brought like 6 batteries and I was constantly charging the ones that I had emptied so that I wouldn't run out at the end of the day. And now with the X-H2S, I'm able to shoot a 6-hour event, shoot over 2000 photos on one battery charge. And that's just amazing. For video, I have to say it runs out a little bit quicker. So if I had to do video all day, every day, I would probably buy 3 or 4 extra batteries, but it will still hold out significantly longer than the older battery. And I think that's very impressive when you consider how incredibly advanced the video and autofocusing features of this camera are compared to the older camera. And now it's time for the conclusion. Who is this camera for? Now I'm gonna be brutally honest, if you're a hobbyist, this is not your camera. It's a little bit too advanced and things like ProRes, codecs and 40 frames raw bursts, those are just overkill for the average hobbyist. However, if you are a professional, if you're looking to turn professional, if you want to have a camera that can do it all, you can throw in any situation, whether it's photo or video, portraiture, landscape, adventure photography or sports or events, this camera is a great option for you. And I, for one, I'm happy to use this camera for many years to come. Alright, that's it for today. I hope this was a useful review to you. If you have any questions left, feel free to put them in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, feel free to like and subscribe. It does really help me out. And as always, there's more to come in the future. For now, have a great day and go out and shoot.